So I was actually thinking about a couple of things, right? And I was going on Instagram, right? And I came across a lot of AI videos, right? Of white European people doing work that other people do, and I started thinking about that, right? And well, one, I think it just literally shows how we still live in a society of enslavement. That's number one, right? And number two, what I noticed is that if it wasn't, right, for other groups of people not working, right, those type of jobs, right, society itself would collapse, And then I was actually thinking about this, right? And it's so funny, but it's so true. A lot of people truly don't understand that around the 1400s, right, when white European people were in their homeland, right, and before they came out to America, right, I don't know if a lot of people have done, read the history books or anything like that, right, but a lot of white European people back in their continent of Europe at that time, before they discovered America, if you look at the way they were living at that certain time, you will truly understand how their continent became so screwed up. Now it makes a lot of sense. Because for those who don't know, right, back in the 1400s, right, European people already had a society, right, of the rich, were rich, wealthy, powerful, and the poor, well, they were poor, right? And the poor, they were even called pestilence, okay? There's actually even a war that occurred towards the same crap that's going on here in America right now. The powerful people would charge the pestilence a lot of taxes, okay? And the pestilence would revoke, obviously, their tax cuts that the rich were getting, and before you knew it, there was a civil war going on in Europe, okay? But before all that happened, right, now, let's just pay attention towards the circumstances that they were living in, right? And the circumstances that white European people were living in is really disgusting. Well, one, they believed that showering was a sin. So they never cleaned themselves, they never showered, they never brushed their teeth, they didn't believe in hygiene, they didn't believe in nothing. Women did not shave, they were disgusting, okay? That's number one. Number two, European people didn't have a lot of the ingredients that they have now here in America, right? Thanks to other people, now they obviously are having different types of, fruits and vegetables and stuff and different cultures, right? But if people really pay attention to the, food that these people would eat at their time or back in their land, they ate the most disgusting, rare food that you would be disgusted by, okay? And they really, really bad, they wouldn't even eat steak or none of that because they couldn't afford it, right? Only the rich could afford, steaks and stuff like that, right? Mostly the majority of them would eat fish. Now, obviously, once they came to America, and having the privilege of meeting indigenous people, right? Because if it wasn't for them, they would have been exterminated. But besides all of that, they didn't have nothing going on in Europe, okay? Another thing I want to mention, their infrastructure was bad. And when I mean bad, I mean bad, okay? They didn't have no infrastructure neither, okay? These people didn't have a sewage or any type of way to, when they would take a crap, they didn't know how to dispose it, right? They would throw it outside of their windows in plastic, I think it was like plastic, or not plastic, cotton robes, and they would put it inside their shit in there, and they would throw it outside. The streets smell like shit, for those who don't know, all right? Another thing that they did that was really disgusting was they wouldn't, and then there's a lot of stories as well that a lot of them, they were even cannibals, okay? But besides all of that, right, another disgusting thing that they would do a lot was, they believed that mud would cure it had to do something with a disease that was going on through the Black Death around that time. And then they found out that the Black Death, by wearing a stupid doctor's suit, right, which, I don't know if people have seen it, looks like a penguin with spices on the beak. Well, they started using that, but before that, they thought mud would help them cure the diseases, which they were actually even making it worse. But not just that, right? A lot of them would live with live animals. So they would share their homes with livestock, for those who did not know that. But this is how disgusting and dirty these people were, okay? They would live with real animals at their home. Fucking disgusting, okay? Another thing that, they were going through, obviously for those who do not know, they were going through the Black Death. That is what pretty much killed 70% of European people in the whole continent of Europe. It was slaughtering, killing people left and right. And that is what they brought to America, to the indigenous community, who were the opposite of what they are. They were clean, they cleaned their streets, they brushed their teeth, they were showered 3 to 4 times a day, they didn't have no diseases because they were so clean. Their water was pure. As a matter of fact, after the Europeans arrived here, after finding out how the indigenous people were purifying their water, well, they took that idea back to Europe. Europe, and that is how they started purifying their water. Okay? But yeah, man, I just think that, a lot of people truly don't know history, especially a lot of white people. This is why they're so racist and ignorant. But at the end of the day, I just think that it's really interesting how this country doesn't like to show or tell these things in history books, because obviously it makes them look despicable human beings, which they are, But at the end of the day, you could understand why they are as ruthless and violent as the way they are, and terrorists, because the way they were living, and a lot of them were actually even slaves of other wealthy people who owned them. And that's how the rich started to not enslave their slaves. They released their slaves and they made their slaves to go enslave, indigenous or black African Americans. And that is how this is where we're at this current day, right? But I just think it's really funny how without the Mexican, right, the white man wouldn't be able to build shit here. This country would have fallen apart a long, long time ago. You could just tell with the society, what's going on right now. If it wasn't for the indigenous person, taking care of their land and, and creating infrastructure, the white man wouldn't do shit. I mean, the white man is nothing but a lazy ass who doesn't know how to do nothing, As a matter of fact, if he's out in the sun too long, his ass will get skin cancer and die. Or turn like a damn fucking hot Cheeto. So at the end of the day, I mean, it makes a lot of sense why these people never have jobs. And they always try to find a way to, make others work for them, and they don't want to work at all, And you could just tell that's the same thing that was going on in Europe. They didn't do shit. They didn't build nothing. Once they came out here, well, they made other people build things for them because they didn't know how to build shit, But I think what's really interesting about these individuals right now is that they're complaining about people who belong here, who are not immigrants, but actually indigenous. They're the ones who are the immigrants. They're the ones who've been benefiting off of their work and, labor. And they're the ones who cross the Atlantic Ocean. But at the end of the day, the white man wants to complain about them when the white man has nothing to offer but hate and racism in this country. That's all he's good for, So I think it's really interesting how they want to make it seem that, like getting rid of the immigrants, which I would want to remind people that if they had an issue with immigrants, maybe they should not be stealing land that doesn't belong to them, and maybe they should go back where they come from. But obviously, these people are a bunch of hypocrites that don't want to listen to the truth. Besides that, though, like I said, man, I just think it's interesting that, you can see it right now, man. Without these hardworking people, right, that are indigenous, that they contribute a lot to society, and they offer a lot of services that these white parasites wouldn't do. If it wasn't for the indigenous community, this country would fall apart on his ass, Because trust me, the white man ain't doing shit. He's just being a lazy ass like always. He's always been, He doesn't do shit. He doesn't know how to build. He doesn't know how to do nothing. So at the end of the day, you're seeing what's going on, man. It's collapsing. The country's collapsing. But, the white man's racism will always get the best of him, But besides all that, yeah, peace out.